Ladies and gentlemen, I have a question for you. How can we get rid of nuclear waste for once and for all? This is a very important question because today, in France, for example, there are 1.5 million cubic meters of nuclear waste. This is equivalent to 4 of the towers at 122 Leadenhall Street in London, aka the Cheese Grater Tower. So it's a lot of nuclear waste. Luckily, 90% of this waste will stop being radioactive in just the space of a few centuries. However, even worse than that, the other 10% will stay radioactive for a very long time, sometimes for even more than 100,000 years. So this is an enormous problem, and nobody has currently found a solution to it. So this means that the topic is still hotly debated, and there are many options we can consider for nuclear waste storage. For example, some researchers have suggested that we send nuclear waste into the sun. This seems not to be a bad idea because the sun has two rather interesting features. Firstly, it's really far away, and secondly, it burns absolutely everything that comes into contact with it. There is just one tiny snag with this idea though, because to send something to the sun, you need a rocket. And as you may have seen, rockets are not super reliable. Sometimes a rocket might explode as it's taking off, sometimes it might explode as it's leaving the Earth's gravitational field. So if we were to fill a rocket with nuclear waste, it could end rather badly for mankind. There are other options, of course. We could send nuclear waste to the bottom of the ocean. This is exactly what some countries have been doing for a few decades, until they also realised just how dangerous this was, because the barrel could explode with the pressure under the sea, and then we have nuclear waste floating around, killing the whales. So this method has also been banned. Now, along comes Finland, and Finland have their very own solution to nuclear waste, and they called this onkalo. This is the Finnish word for cave. The solution with onkalo is to dig 500 meters below the surface of the earth and bury the waste in sealed barrels. They created a huge network of tunnels, and once the tunnels are full, they will close them and seal them off forever. Well, I say forever, but it will be at least 100,000 years until the waste is no longer radioactive. However, there are also problems with onkalo. There's no guarantee that the ground where onkalo is will actually remain stable over 100,000 years. What if there's an earthquake or the tectonic plates shift? If that happens, then the radioactivity would leak out and leach up to the surface. Not only this, but there's another problem too. How are we going to explain to the humans in 100,000 years' time that there's something really dangerous buried right in this specific place? In other words, how can we transmit a comprehensible message during 100,000 years, bearing in mind the fact that 10,000 years ago, humans didn't even know how to write? What words should we use? What language? What types of drawings? These are all very good questions, and they are exactly the questions that the US Energy Department asked. They commissioned a 350-page report, and the conclusion of this very, very long report was that nothing guarantees that the options they choose would work in 100,000 years. They said, however, that the best option would be to have a landscape that suggests danger. Therefore, they suggested using a spiky landscape that puts people off from going into this area, or to have forbidding blocks so that nobody wants to go there and it's scary, a bit like the maze in the Maze Runner. As well as this, they said that they should have a message kiosk with scary drawings inside so that people don't want to go there. And we could have pictures such as the very famous painting from Norwegian Expressionism from the 19th century. But even if humans understand the idea that you shouldn't go here just based on a landscape, we can't guarantee that that will be enough. After all, we are curious beings, especially when it comes to digging things up. For example, contemporary archaeologists never let anything stop them from violating the peace of ancient tombs, and I don't see any reason why our behaviour would change in 100,000 years' time. This is why another far more radical solution was also suggested in that 350-page report. Simply to forget. No sign, no trace, nothing. Simply hope that nobody decides to dig in that very spot. So for now, Finland hasn't decided which way to go with hiding or putting people off on Carlo. And they still have some time because the facility won't be shut until the end of the 21st century. In the meantime, France also has a landfill programme where they're burying their long-lived radioactive waste in a place called Bure, which is in the Meuse region. They named their project Cigeo, and it's slightly different to Onkalo in Finland. This is because the French government has decided that during 100 years, any nuclear waste that is buried needs to be easy to dig up. This is in case we find a better solution. And many researchers are working on this better solution, and the current plan is to go for transmutation. Transmutation is a process which allows radioactive atoms to be transformed into atoms which are still radioactive, but will stop being radioactive faster. So eventually the idea is that we could dig up this radioactive waste and recycle it. Let me explain. Let's say we have a bar of used uranium that comes from a nuclear power plant. At the moment, only 5% of that uranium bar actually creates any energy. This other 95% doesn't really do anything at all. Technically, this 95%, due to the limits of science and technology right now, is called nuclear waste. However, in France, we don't call it nuclear waste. We call it recoverable materials, because hopefully we will actually be able to reuse this 95% of the uranium in a new generation reactor to make more energy. But unfortunately, as it's very clear, this technology is a long way from being usable. And anyway, this method would still produce nuclear waste. Probably less, but it would still produce some. Meanwhile, we are waiting for a solution. And the issue is that by 2030, we're going to have another 3 cheese grater towers full of nuclear waste to deal with.